This is the video to show how we use the chop saw or compound miter saw in the woodshop. The compound miter saw or chop saw is typically used for cross-cutting wood. So as opposed to the table saw, where you're usually ripping wood going along the long dimension, with the chop saw you're going across one of the shorter dimensions. Typically, ripping and cross-cutting refers to the grain of the wood. With the piece of wood I have here, it's plywood, and so each ply or layer of wood is alternating in grain direction, but we still use the same terminology that we're going to be cross-cutting this piece, even though it may well be in line with the grain. So with the compound miter saw, it's fairly straightforward. It is, however, significantly different in a bunch of ways from the table saw. There is a significantly larger blade. It is 12 inches versus 10 inches, and it's protected by a thin piece of plastic versus a big chunk of steel. The blade comes towards you, and it's directly driven by a motor. There are no belts that could slip, and it's not a saw stop. It will keep going. It has no sensitivity to what it's cutting. So for all those reasons, as always, make sure you're wearing eye protection and using it with a great deal of respect and caution. So when you're cutting pieces, you want to make sure that they aren't going to move on you. So if it's at a comfortable distance, you can hold it with your hand. Obviously, you don't ever want your fingers in the orange, but if it's, if you're a comfortable distance away, say 3 inches, then that's usually okay. If you're closer, then you can get a clamp from the clamp shelf and hold it in place that way. These pieces slide in case you want to help clamp it in a certain way. And then there's another method for holding. We have this clamp. So this inserts into these holes, and then this clamp slides, and you engage the threads by flipping this down and tightening it. And then when you want to release it, you just loosen it and take the threads up. So that can be useful for holding pieces. In terms of the blade on the chop saw, we don't normally change it. We have this blade for it, and then we have a metal cutting blade. But in terms of wood, this is pretty much the blade that we keep on it. If you do want to change the blade, it's important to unplug the machine so that it is double dead, because there's only one power switch on this. There's no vacuum assembly on this chop saw, so when you're done, it's important to bring the vacuum over and clean out behind it so that the area stays clean. In terms of the mitering functionalities, it can turn this way, so you would loosen this and then press this button so that you can turn the base like that. There are certain angles with the arrows that it will click into on its own, and then others that you can click into, or that you can place it at and then tighten it down at your discretion. We'll just leave it at 0 degrees for now. In terms of changing the other mitering capability, there is a handle in the back that we can change. So we will loosen it. It's obviously backwards to us, so you have to turn it the other way. And then when it's loose, you can turn the whole head. So you can make cuts in this direction. When you're done, you want to bring it back to 0 and make sure that it's straight by grabbing a square and holding it to the blade to make sure that it is, in fact, pretty close to 0 degrees, and then tightening it back up. The indicator here for the angle is decent, but it's not perfect. So if you want to make sure that your cuts are really accurate, you should probably use a different measuring device to measure your angles. So those are the two mitering capabilities. In terms of actually operating the machine, you press the safety on the top with the web of your hand, and then the trigger with your fingers. The same as with the table saw, you want to stand out of the way of the blade, so either to one side or the other, so that if something does come out, it goes past you. And when you bring the blade down, you make the cut, and then you actually bring it up and then release the trigger. And the reason for this is that when you release it, it decelerates pretty rapidly, and so it wobbles a bit, and it can scratch up the edge of your piece. So in general, you bring it down, up, and then release. And then obviously you wait until the blade is completely still before reaching in. As with the other tools, you want to make sure you have no loose hair, clothing, jewelry, whatnot that could get near the blade. And exercise due caution. Something to keep in mind is that the blade takes out a significant chunk of wood, so if you're cutting something down, it's important to bear that in mind. So if you have a 4-foot piece of wood, you're not going to get 4 1-foot pieces out of it. And planning on making sure that you make your cuts in the right spot is an important part of planning. So that's most of the important pieces for the chop saw. I'm just going to demonstrate now a cut. So I'm going to put on ear protection because it's a pretty loud tool. Standing out of the way of the blade, holding it with one hand, pushing the safety down. So that's all there is to it with the chop saw, and then when you're done, you just grab the vacuum cleaner and vacuum it up, throw out any scraps, and then you are all set.